Hi, I just want to quickly explain how to read your scoring report. When you get your scoring report, it's going to look like this, which can be confusing because there are a lot of numbers in it. So if you want a quick summary of how you did in your test, this is the number that you want to look at. It is the weighted average of all the sections in each question. In this case, it is also measured in GPA units, which means a 4.0 is as high as it gets, and a 0 is as low as it gets. If you get a 3, it is going to be equivalent to a B. If you get a 2, it is equivalent to a C. If you get a 1, it is equivalent to an F. So in this case, this is fictional, but I got a fictional score of 3.57, which is somewhere between an A and a B. This number is a weighted average of the two main sections of the questions. The first question is, whether f is a function or not. That portion is worth 0.3 divided by 1, which is 30% of the entire score of the exam. The second portion, which is what kind of a function, the characterization of the function, is worth 0.7 divided by 1, which is 70% of the final score of the exam. So 3.25 is what I got for that section, for the first section, whether f is a function or not. 3.7 is what I got for the second section, which is to characterize the function. So when I multiply 0.3 by 3.25 and add to it 0.7 times 3.7, then I get the actual final score for the entire exam of 3.75. So now the question is, how did I get a score of 3.25 out of the first section of the questions? So the first thing is, I did not actually score the questions one by one, and instead I look at all the questions of the entire exam and I look for patterns. So let's take the first part of each question as an example. Okay, that part is really just to test whether f is a function or not. And if the answer is true, you have to give me an example of an element of the domain that is not mapped to anything in the codomain. So it's a quantification, quantified statement kind of question. I got a 3.5, after evaluating every part one of every answer of the entire test. So the way I assign these values, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, or somewhere in between these integers, is if something is a perfect answer for all of the questions, if a part of an answer is entirely correct for all the questions in the exam, then it's going to be a 4. A 3 basically indicates that there are some mistakes, but I can see those mistakes are either accidental, due to carelessness, okay, lack of time, or an omission. Like, if someone, didn't have enough time to answer all of the questions, but answer a majority of the questions. When I say majority, I really mean like, answer like at least 7 questions. That person will then get a 3 if assuming all the answers are answered correctly. Or if somebody answers everything, but made a few mistakes, but those mistakes are accidental, which means from looking at all of the answers, I can see that most of them are answered correctly. So I can see how that person actually understands the concept, but probably made a mistake, in one or two of them. So that would be a 3. Now, if I see consistent mistakes, okay, some right, some wrong, but the wrong ones are kind of frequent, okay, it's all over the place, and it does reflect that, maybe that person did not quite understand the concept, but enough, okay, to kind of get by, that person will get a 2 as a score. If I see most of the answers are incorrect, okay, or if I can see, okay, let me put it this way. If I don't see enough evidence that that person understands enough of a concept to be passable. And yet some of those answers are there, they are correct, but there's really not enough evidence to convince me that that person understands the concept sufficiently. There's going to be a score of 1. So within each section, okay, so is f a function is basically a section. So within each section, it has individual parts. So in this case, it has 4 parts. The first 3 parts really correspond to the first 3 parts of the questions. And then there's the 4th part here, which is looking for the consistency between the parts. So in this case, I got a pretty good score, 3.5 out of 4 for spotting elements in the domain that do not map to anything in the codomain. And I do the same with the second part of the question, which is spotting an element in the domain that maps to at least 2 different elements in the codomain. Okay, but somehow I got a 2 over here. Okay, but that means when f is not a function, I would indicate it is not a function, and that's how I got a perfect score in part 3, because I correctly identified every single f, whether it is a function or not. But it is inconsistent with my conclusion of part 1 and part 2. So that inconsistency is what got me a low score for the last portion here, because my answers are not self-consistent. I do not seem to understand. I understand sufficiently, but I made a lot of mistakes, between relating the quantified statements and whether f is a function or not. So when you look at this, okay, 3.5 times 0.25, 3.5 times 25, 4 times times 0.25, and then 2 times 0.25. When you add up all of those particular products, that should add up to 3.25 in this case. The second section of each question is a little bit more complicated, partially because I chose to use a ratio that is not divided by 1 or any integers. But don't let that kind of stop you or slow you down, because all you have to do at the end of the day is to look at this as one single value. And you basically want to add up, this is the weight. Okay, when you look at 0.333 divided by 2.25, that is the weight that is applied to the score of this part of the question, of this subportion of the question, of this part of the question. So when you add up 0.333 divided by 0.25, 0.333 divided by 0.25, and so on, and you add up all of these weight, they should all add up to 2.25. So that means if you multiply this 3 by this weight, you multiply this 4 by this weight, and you do the same thing for every single subpart, and you add up all of those products, that should become this score over here. Okay. So once again, there are, let's see, 5 parts to this portion, but there are 6 points here because once again, I'm looking for consistencies between the first two parts. The first one is really asking, can you tell me if any element that is, if there are 2 elements in the domain mapped to the same element in the codomain, what is that element in the codomain? That's what the first part is asking. This one is asking, do we have any element in the codomain that is not mapped to? Okay, that's the second one. So if I see any inconsistency between 4a and 4c, because 4a, the answer of 4a should tell you the answer of 4c, and then the answer of 4b should tell you the answer of 4d. But if I see any inconsistency, that is going to be deducted from this part over here, which is relating the statements, the quantified statements, to the qualification of whether f as a function is injective or not. And then the last one is just once you know whether it is injective or not, is it bijective? That's the last part. So 3.57 is basically almost right between an A and a B, leaning very slightly to an A. So I would say that's not a very bad score. And to get a actual passing grade out of the class, 1.5 is the threshold, because 1.5 is right between a 1, which is a D, and a 2, which is a C. So anyone who's getting 1.5 or more as the weighted average of all the sections is technically passing this test with a letter grade of C or better. All right, so I hope this answers some of the questions that you might have as you get this email. And for those of you who want to know more statistics out of the test, such as the mean of the whole class, the standard deviation of the whole class, I can include it in another report. Okay, that's okay. It's pretty easy for me to figure all that out. But it means I'm gonna have to spam you again with another email. Okay, so which is not a big deal. All right. Oh, by the way, when I enter this into Canvas, you will only see the final score, but not the breakdown, because there's no easy way for Canvas, to actually understand how I calculate the final score. So I will only put the final score into Canvas. I will see if I can add, this entire description here as the comment, okay, of um, that particular score item. If it is easy enough, and I can figure it out, I'll put it in. If not, this email is the only way you can find out, how your final score breaks down into its parts. In Canvas, I can also turn on ranking, which means you can see how you rank in the class. It really should not be important, because the way I assign letter grade is not by curve, at least not by curve by default. So it is strictly based on the value of how you score in the exam. All right, so I'm gonna upload this to YouTube and send a link in Discord.